Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lucie Lederhendler. For anyone who is a new audience for the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba, I am the curator here, as well as a lecturer at Brandon University in art history. My heritage is Yiddish and settler. I lived on the East Coast of the United States and in Montreal, Quebec, in Canada, before moving here to Brandon, Manitoba in 2021. We're going to be hearing some themes of displacement today, and I'll be thinking about all the different ways that a people can grow roots and how those roots can perform in different ways. For my part, landed in Brandon and on behalf of the AGSM, I honor the fact that where I am speaking from, called Treaty 2 territory, is the homeland of the Métis Nation, as well as the lands traditionally shared by the Anishinaabe, Dene, Cree, Oji-Cree, and the Dakota peoples. With that, I would like to invite my fellow Brandonite, Tim Smith, up to introduce himself to you.
Hi,
Hello,
thank you
Tim.
very much, Lucie. Appreciate it. My name is Tim Smith, and I am a photographer here in Brandon. It'll be 15 years later this week, I believe, that I've been here in Brandon. Grew up in Winnipeg, but lived all over, moved here from Edmonton, and I've spent the last 15 years photographing prairie life, including the last 13 years documenting Hutterite culture in Manitoba, and particularly southwestern Manitoba. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Right, thank you. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. Unfortunately, Dr. Axel Lapp, the curator of MEWO Kunsthalle, is not able to join us today, but we are very happy that Axel Stetter is on hand to give us a look at the exhibition in real time and answer any questions you have on behalf of the MEWO Kunsthalle. So Axel is going to walk around the gallery in Memmingen, which is a town in Bavaria in southern Germany. For AGSM audiences who might not know, I would like to draw the parallel between our two institutions as far as our ambitions at serving contemporary art to a pretty vast region. Thank you, Axel, and welcome.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all or to hear you, and I hope you will have a good evening today. As Lucie said, unfortunately, Axel Lapp got sick, so I'm here. I will be your eyes today, if you want to say so, and I'm happy to show you around, and I think we are going to manage it quite well. If you want to have a closer look, I think everyone can stop by or tell me where to stop. So that will be a lovely evening today. For me, just quickly, I'm doing the PR and the press at MEWO Kunsthalle since 7 years. And I'm also curating a bit here, and I run a small contemporary art space in New Ulm. And now I'm mostly involved in the MEWO Kunsthalle, and so happy to have you all here and enjoy the evening.
Thank you very much. That's a good moment to tell anybody who's watching that the way to ask questions to any of the three of us is to put them into the comment section on whatever platform you're joining us from, and we will answer them for you. We'll receive those here and be able to respond to you in real time. Now, the idea for this talk was put forward not just because we wanted to celebrate an artist from our region, as we always do, but also this particular series, which the AGSM had here in 2016, curated beautifully by the brilliant Natalia Lebedinskaia, is really grounded here in southwestern Manitoba, as Tim said in his introduction, and it's continued to grow. So I'm going to just ask Tim to riff on that idea of this continuing labor of love that's really taken on some international roots.
Sure, yeah. So I started this project back in 2009, and I was looking for some long-term projects that I could kind of focus on, because my background as a photojournalist means that I'm typically in and out of people's lives for very short periods of time. Our deadlines are typically the next day, sometimes in a few days or in a week. And we have to work quickly, but I wanted to find some projects that I could spend a long time on without worrying about deadlines. And at the time, I thought maybe I'd spend 6 months on this project, maybe a year. I never imagined that I would end up spending 13 years photographing on colonies. But it really came down to the more I learned, the more I knew I didn't know, and the more I learned about the complexity about colony life, and that kind of the deeper I dove into trying to photograph every aspect and create a body of work that was as complex and nuanced as possible.
Right.
And like you mentioned, I was really blessed to have Natalia at the AGSM reach out in 2016 and offer me my first exhibition at the gallery, which was really an area that I knew so little about because my background isn't a traditional art background. It's, like I said, a journalism background. So I didn't know much about exhibiting, and was really fortunate that the AGSM took a chance on me. And there's a lot of similarities and parallels to this exhibition that's now showing in Germany, because this exhibition is my first international gallery exhibition. I've had work in a few different festivals overseas and that, but this was my first solo show in an international gallery, and it's kind of fitting because of the similarities to my first ever solo show at the AGSM back in 2016. So it's really nice to be able to carry on that work that that the AGSM gave me my first chance on, and then now to show it with even newer work at MEWO Kunsthalle in Germany.
Yeah, and it's also we talked about this briefly when we first met about this conversation, but there's also a bit of a parallel of the history of the Hutterite peoples in southern Germany, which it turns out isn't really wasn't Dr. Lapp's motivation, but I think there is a really interesting line between the parallels of our cities and this population that was displaced from one to the other.
Yeah, exactly. It's the history of Hutterite culture, begins in the Tyrol region of northern Austria in the late 1500s, and this area in southern Germany is very close to, and has Memmingen has its own important history within the Anabaptist movement, which the Hutterites are, and their history is also a part of. And then at the same time, it's very close to other important areas in Hutterite history, such as Innsbruck, Austria, and that. So these connections to that history are really interesting and make it the perfect place for an exhibition.
Yeah. I also want to backtrack. Another way that there was a kismet of your exhibition here at the AGSM is that Natalia, who was formerly the full-time curator here, has a background in photography, which is not my specialty. Right. So if you would, for my sake, talk to me a little bit about the difference of your approach when you create, because obviously it's a beautiful photograph. It's an artistic photograph. It's not necessarily photojournalism, but as far as your approach, what's the difference?
Well, I certainly, my approach definitely has that reportage background, where I am just, kind of the fly on the wall type documentarian. I build relationships and gain trust and get to know the people that I'm photographing, many of which are really good friends now and people that I care about deeply. And then I just spend time. I spend a lot of time. And that means a lot of time not taking photos, a lot of time visiting, a lot of time taking crappy photos, just waiting for kind of moments to show themselves to me. And that's really been my approach throughout this entire project. Sometimes I will go out to a colony with a specific subject that I want to photograph, or an event that I know about. And a lot of the time I just go just to see, just out of curiosity, just to see what's happening and wait for an interesting moment to unfold in front of me.
What was your initial motivation to do this? Was there an anthropological thing, or was there a knowledge that that there was more depth to these colonies than outsiders maybe attribute to them, or was that something that emerged as you were doing your research?
Yeah, I think a lot of my motivations kind of emerged throughout taking on the project and have changed throughout the project. So initially, when I began this project, I really knew nothing about Hutterite culture, and my initial motivations was just to create a longer body of work where I wasn't rushed by a deadline. And I went into it knowing that I knew nothing about Hutterite culture. I had my own misconceptions. So I wanted to learn more about their culture. So going into this project, I poured over every book I could find, every university thesis, every bit of material I could find on Hutterite culture, Hutterite history, and I continue to go over that throughout the project and reread books, reread for things I miss, things I forget. But it definitely changed as the project grew to a more anthropological approach, and wanting to showcase both the complexity and nuances on the colonies, being wary of one-dimensional stereotypes. I really wanted to give as broad and well-rounded view of their culture as possible, and move away from any stereotypes that I may have had going into the project or that others in the project may have. And I'm also fascinated just by the effects that time has on all of us, but particularly on this culture, and the subtle and sometimes not so subtle changes on the colonies and within their culture that I get to witness because I've spent so long on it.
Yeah, that's a great example that that Axel's zooming in on is cell phones are pretty common. And it's worth saying that especially between colonies, it's not a homogenous culture at all. There's a common origin, but these are the people who have allowed you into their colony. So there's still a curtain. This can't represent in the way that nothing anthropological can actually be accurate, right? Except for the actual existence.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm careful I don't speak for the Hutterites. I don't consider myself an expert on Hutterite culture. The Hutterites themselves are the experts. And my work is just one very small piece of a vibrant and broad puzzle. And I hope that my work can serve as, for anyone who has an interest in Hutterites or a curiosity and doesn't know much about their culture, particularly in Manitoba. And if my work can, I guess, act as like an entry point to learning more about that culture, that's what I'm hopeful for. Because photographs are very easily digestible. You can learn a lot, relatively simply, just by studying the work. And then if that provides an entry point for someone maybe curious about the culture or didn't know a lot about the culture, then hopefully they move on from this work and read some of the literature on Hutterite culture, read some of the work written by the Hutterites, maybe reach out to a colony if they're interested in learning more.
Right. Could we, I know you just said I'm not an expert, I can't teach, but just in case anybody's watching, I think it might be valuable and useful to take that moment and say, so Hutterite is something that I only encountered in Manitoba. It's not Mennonite, it's not Amish.
Right.
So can you give us a little bit of background about this label, this
Sure. So you mentioned two other prominent and typically more well-known Anabaptist groups, the Mennonites and the Amish. And I think the Mennonites specifically, because their culture is so much broader. So, you know, the Mennonites are all over North and South America. So they're a lot more accessible to the mainstream, I guess, whereas the Hutterites only exist in Western Canada and the Northwestern United States. So maybe if you grow up in Ontario or the East Coast of Canada, you might not be familiar with Hutterite culture. Same thing with if you're growing up anywhere outside of kind of the mid to Northwest United States, you wouldn't be too familiar. But if you grew up in Montana or Washington, South Dakota, North Dakota, you might be familiar with their culture. And all three Anabaptist groups came out of the Radical Reformation in the 1500s, and they share similar beliefs in some ways. The biggest distinction between Hutterite culture and the Amish or the Mennonites is that the Hutterites are truly communal, and they live together on colonies where everything is shared amongst everyone who lives within that community. So each community, each colony is communal, and everything from the houses to the vehicles to all the food that's grown, everything is shared amongst the colony and grown together. And that's the big difference between them and the Amish and the Mennonites. Obviously, there's many other differences as well, but the communalism aspect is one of the most important aspects of Hutterite culture.
That's the definition there. And as we said, completely non-homogeneous between colonies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, there is some homogeneity, and to an extent, and it's like subtle differences between, for one, there's three different groups of Hutterites: the Schmiedeleute, the Leerleute, and the Dariusleute throughout North America. So there's differences within the three groups. In Manitoba here, we have the Light group, which are considered the most liberal of the three groups, the most progressive of the three groups. But even then, you can't paint every colony with the same brush. Within the most liberal group, you still have quite conservative colonies, and then more liberal colonies, and then a broad mix in between.
When I describe art history to students, I say all art has been about time, and time doesn't exist. And in Natalia's text, she says that what you're actually documenting is change. That's what you've gone looking for when you take these photographs. Would you say that that's accurate?
I think that's fair. I think it's I'm definitely interested in how things are changing within the colonies, and that the Hutterites are at a point in their history where they have existed for close to around the last 100 years, with little persecution. There's been minor points of contention in terms of when they first immigrated to Canada in the early 1900s, like 1918, 1920. And there was restrictions put on how much land they could buy in places like Alberta and Manitoba. And so they have faced some scrutiny and some persecution, but not the likes of which they had seen through a lot of periods of their history. And so the last 100 years, and especially the last 50 years, have been extremely prosperous and peaceful for Hutterite culture. And that's why I'm fascinated by how the culture deals with that. And because one thing the Hutterites have done so successfully has been during periods of horrific persecution, and that they have been able to insulate themselves and put up these protective walls and barriers against the outside world that have strengthened their community within. But when they go through periods of peace and prosperity, it's easier to let down your guard. And sometimes that can lead to lead to complications and lead to almost kind of like a death of a thousand cuts, like very simple ways of losing tradition and culture because you don't have your guard up.
Yeah.
And the Hutterites seem to be managing this really successfully right now, but I know there's a lot of worry amongst some of the elders and the ministers about how much change is too much and how that will affect their traditions. So I'm really interested in seeing how colonies are navigating this need to hold on to their traditions while also changing to reflect the encroaching outside world and what they need to do to stay relevant and a part of that world.
Yeah, I think it's such a common question between all diasporic people, all displaced people, of the culture becomes an egg that you have to protect, that you have to carry around with you, as opposed to something living, because you're a minority, right? Because you're othered in these places that are not your roots. I think certainly my experience of this culture is that there's I was going to say just deeply agricultural culture, but approached with a joy and a reverence in a way that other agricultural cultures in Manitoba don't necessarily approach that.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a difference when the entire community is working towards the same goal within the community. Can't remember what book it was in, but one of the books that I read on Hutterite history and Hutterite life, a woman said, like, our life isn't perfect, but even when we're doing crappy work or doing a job we don't like or anything, we're doing it together. There's that community aspect to it. So, even if you've got a job, you're not, cleaning or whatever, doing something that you may not be looking forward to, and that you have a community of friends and family that you're all doing it together. So there's this lightheartedness, there's always joking and like fun aspects to it, which, differ a lot from a lot of the work that's done, in the outside world. I mean, my work specifically, I work alone predominantly. I mean, my job's a bit different as a photojournalist, but it can be said for, especially during what we've gone through over the last couple of years with the pandemic and the isolation that we've all gone through, having to work from home and being cut off from friends and family during this. The Hutterites, because they all live so close together and do everything together from work to play, eating, celebration, mourning. There's just that really strong community aspect that I think we're losing in mainstream society because of how the society is structured and how busy we are.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny, for speaking for myself, it sounds exhausting. Like, I need to be alone sometimes, but
Sure.
That's because I get it sometimes. And then there's loneliness,
Mm-hmm.
is the other side of that coin. You had said that there's some new photographs that where you've gotten to see an actual individual evolve over particularly our 6 years in between what we're talking about now.
Sure.
I know there's one of a young woman who left the colony and now is kind of punky.
Yeah, Michelle. I've known Michelle's family for 13 years now, and they were one of the first families that really embraced me at Dearborn Colony and allowed me to spend time. So there's another photo of her somewhere in the gallery as well, from way back in 2010. she's tugging on her brother's suspenders while they're having like an after school snack. And, back then, I'd have to check how old she was then, but it would have been around, 12 or so. And now she's, I think, 24.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been able to see her and many other members of the community grow up. So that's Michelle there, way back in 2010, tugging on her brother Simeon's suspenders as they enjoy coffee. This photo's from very early on in my project. And then those two portraits that Axel was just showing a moment ago, they're from, I think, 2015 and 2020, respectfully. So that's the great thing that comes from spending such an absurd amount of time on a project, is getting to watch children grow up, getting to watch young adults now have families of their own, being there for things like weddings and celebrations, and then unfortunately sometimes for tragedies and for funerals and things like that as well. But you really get to see a community grow and change, and just simply by that added ingredient of time.
Right. There is a lot of joy and honor and nobility in your photographs, but you did mention tragedy. Can you talk about bearing witness to that gambit of content?
Yeah, it's not so much it's not always bearing witness, but it's more just getting to know people I photograph, and then I guess being that, just losing people. Photojournalism, I guess, in some ways kind of grows the amount of people in my life that I care for, and who I have an attachment to, and I'm truly, absolutely blessed and privileged that I'm allowed into these people's lives and that, but it comes at a bit of a price, I guess, because it's hard to lose people, and and that happens from time to time, and that happens to all of us, and it's a very natural thing in that, but it's not always easy.
So here's obviously a depiction of tragedy. One would assume.
Actually, yeah. So this actually isn't tragedy. This is behind the picture is actually a really happy moment. But so this is Deborah Hofer, days before, 2 days before she married to a colony in North Dakota, Forest River. Tradition amongst the Hutterites is that the bride marries to the groom's colony. And if you end up, dating plays out very similar to the outside world, and guys and girls meet at events or when they're visiting other colonies, and then they date and get engaged, etc. And then the big difference is that, A, colony life, and B, that the bride will move to the groom's colony. But sometimes if you're, Deborah and her husband, they met, and he lives in North Dakota, United States. She lived here in Manitoba, so that meant that she was marrying down to Forest River, which obviously on the one hand, she's very excited, because she's marrying the love of her life. And then on the other hand, she's leaving the home that she's known for her entire life and leaving her friends and family. And so there's a sadness there as well. And this was just her saying goodbye as they were loading up the truck to go down to Forest River for the wedding. And so this was her leaving her community for the final time. I mean, obviously she's back to visit and that, but right. In terms of living there.
Yeah. And
so there is a moment of sadness and of missing your friends and relatives.
Another, Axel, why don't you find the blood-spattered young man? That's another one with an unexpected story behind it, which I think really does speak to that nobility, that celebration of a culture that comes across in the in the photographs.
Right.
Here we go. So I think it's interesting as an exhibition designer how you decide to print some pretty monumental and some kind of family portrait sized, kind of, you know, picture frame sized.
Right.
And this one, very appropriately, is monumental. Can you tell us about this one?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this photo is, you know, it's obviously striking to any viewer who sees it for the first time, because this is Justin and he's absolutely covered in blood. And this is after a day of butchering chickens from their egg laying barn. It's a 2-day job. They go through around 11,000 chickens. And basically takes every able-bodied member of the colony, and then sometimes other colonies like Souris and that come and help out during the day of butchering and that. So I was there for the butchering. I've been there a few times for it, quite a few times actually, because they'll do ducks and turkeys and things too. But it's just such a striking image, with him just so covered in blood, and that it just seemed like a natural portrait.
Yeah. Axel's, I should say, Axel's in the gallery without very good Wi-Fi. We're lucky that we had him for this long. We'll get him back later when he logs back in.
Sure.
And without looking at it, I hope people can remember both Justin and Michelle is the name of the other young lady.
Yep.
It seems as though you're quite the portrait artist as well. How much direction do you give them in these deadpan or
for portraits and portraits give me a fair bit of anxiety, but I don't I'll find a background, or sometimes the background, like this photo of Laura here, is just, you know, that's the Eschenschule where she was cleaning. So that
right.
Is
what was that word?
Eschenschule is basically the eating school. So children between the ages of 5 and 15 eat separately from their parents. And I should say that everyone eats their meals communally. Mm-hmm. So the adults eat in one room, and then the children between 5 and 15, they eat separately in the Eschenschule or eating school. And it's just meant to give the adults a break to get on with eating quickly and respectfully, and then move on with their day. And then so the children eat separately, and when they're 15, they graduate, and they're considered basically adult members of the community, and they eat with the adults.
Okay. But you're talking about the portraits.
Yeah, so the portraits, I don't tend to do a lot other than asking the individual, hey, can I make a portrait of you? And sometimes finding a background that will suit. For the one of Justin, it just was the side of the building where they were slaughtering the chickens. For this one of Chantel here in her wedding outfit, it was just some of the forest just in the community and behind her home. So it's just typically the portraits are taken right in the area where the individual is. So Liam in the garden here. Mm-hmm. So they were harvesting melons. So it's just kind of like in the middle of harvest, hey, can you stop here for a minute and let me take a photo of you? And I don't say too much about, you know, their facial expressions or anything. It's kind of just what they give me is what I get. And it's usually only, you know, a minute or two of work. Like it's usually pretty quick.
Good.
And
nobody likes posing for a portrait for too long.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a lot easier to be behind the camera than in front of it. So usually I'll just stop people for a couple minutes and make a couple of frames, and that's it.
Do you give them copies?
Yeah, absolutely. When individuals ask for it, I try to pass on anything I can to members of the community, and that for sure, that's the least I can do.
More generally, did they come out to the exhibition? Are they interested in the fact that this has legs internationally?
Yeah, actually, surprisingly, I've gotten some really nice comments from Hutterite friends and others that I've spoken to lately about the fact that the exhibition is in Germany and one in Korea right now, and they've seemed really excited that their culture is being represented on a world stage, which means a lot to me because they're the one group of people that I want to do right by and whose opinion I care most about when it comes to this work.
Sure.
And that, but I know when the work was at the AGSM, members from Dearborn Colony and Green Acres and other colonies came out and visited the work. The exhibition I have right now at MHC Gallery in Winnipeg, there have been members of Baker Colony and other colonies that have been out to see the work, and it really means a lot. I'm glad that they get to see it in this format and to come out and see their lives represented.
Yeah. No, I won't ask that. I do want to remind, yes, me and Julie had the same thought. Julie's backstage. Thank you. Anybody who joined us later can ask us questions in the comment section, wherever you're joining us from, and we'll receive them here. Do you have a favorite, Tim, that's up right now, or that
a favorite photograph from the project?
Yeah.
It's really hard to pick because some of the photos just mean a lot to me personally, but may not be the best photo. I do love the one of Michelle tugging on Simeon's suspenders. It's from early in the project, and it's not the most technically amazing photograph in that, but I just love the mischievousness and just everything about that memory is great. Another early one, obviously, a photo that seems to get a lot of recognition is the kids playing on the hay bales under the rainbow. For obvious reasons, you add a rainbow into a photo and makes it that much better. But that was
that like button gets smashed. Yeah,
it was you can't predict stuff like that. You can try and put yourself in the right place, but moments like that where everything just kind of lines up are so rare.
I had never seen this at the format. This is why I'm so happy Axel's here to zoom in. But this woman at the far left, just every posture is perfect in this photo.
Yeah, it was so special, and it was so lucky, and it's an anomaly because most of the photos that I make on the colonies come from taking a bit of time to get access and getting to know people. And this photo at Spring Valley was such the opposite. I don't know Spring Valley Colony well. I haven't photographed out there a lot, but I just happened to be in the area that night, and I wasn't even planning on working on anything Hutterite related, but I was passing by the area and just caught a glimpse of some movement in the distance, and I looked through a long lens and saw that it was these kids playing on bales, and at the time it was raining. So I rushed over there and I said, who do I need to talk to take some photos? And they said, no, I'll go talk to the minister. So they pointed out his house, and I rushed over there and I explained the situation. And he was agreeable. So then I rushed back to the bales, and at this time the rain had just kind of stopped drizzling, and all of a sudden this rainbow came out, and it's just, if I'd gone by there half an hour earlier, half an hour later, would have completely missed this.
Or if you hadn't asked permission.
Yeah.
And
it was just luck as it happens.
Yeah. I think it really perfectly encompasses that ambiguity too that we saw with Michelle and with Justin of the play and the work and the labor and the joy. And another one that had a lot of legs is the close up of the fancy pink high tops.
Oh yeah.
But I think that's just kind of the thesis statement. Like this is what we can expect from the series is a challenge of those expectations. Is this version of expectation what you might think, if you think anything, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and shows style within the colony, within their traditions, and that those were Chantel's shoes. And as much as conformity is kind of the overarching norm in Hutterite society, you can't fully extinguish individualism, and especially amongst young people. I mean, the teenage years are in every society are about testing boundaries and finding ourselves, and that. So the way that young men and women kind of find ways to individually, yeah, whatever, like this photo here of the tattoo, to find their own style, their own individuality, is so important, I think. So it's really interesting to see what young men and women do with their style, just whether it's women wearing their headscarves a little differently, like with their own style to it, or adding a little bit of color, like with their shoes, or the young men getting a stylish jacket or hoodie from in town. They're still wearing all their traditional clothing, but maybe they're wearing, like a more contemporary jacket over top, or a pair of shoes.
We have a question from Deirdre on Facebook asking if you've ever turned the camera around so that the subjects take pictures with you. Is there interest in documenting their lives from within their own reality?
I wouldn't say I've ever done it deliberately, but I do have photos that colony members have taken of me, and videos from different events and stuff. I usually go out for field day every year, and inevitably there's usually either a dunk tank at Dearborn, or it's awesome, like slip and slide down the hill, which I pretend I go out there to take photos, but really I just go out there to eat ice cream and cake and take part in take part in the day and that. So inevitably I end up getting some photos of myself out there, and I never take photos of myself, unfortunately, because I'm always focused on other people and that. But I do have some photos from throughout the years on the colonies, and anytime that a colony member shares something with me, a video or a photo from when I'm out there, means a lot. But I haven't, in answer to Deidre's question, I haven't made a conscious effort to associate myself in the project at all. And I think that's, A, I'm not interesting, and B, it's just, again, that reportage journalism background.
I think you made Deirdre think of cinnamon buns with your fair. I think that so much of photography, especially what I've seen here, is the traveling, is the journey, is the research, is the time, right? So we had spoken about how different this series would be in a catalog format as opposed to an exhibition format. Right. And that incorporating your journey as part of the content actually really could make some sense. Deirdre again wonders if you see this project growing into a film in the future. Again, a different format.
Yeah, it's I think it would be amazing. I haven't decided whether I'm the person to do it.
Do you do a film? Do you do moving image?
I do, but I'm not an expert at it. I do. Long story short, I do, and I have taken some video on colonies and that, but still photography has been my primary focus, and it's a lot to do two different things at once. So you really have to decide if I'm doing video, I really have to decide to forego doing stills, and then it's it's about deciding when's appropriate to do that and not worrying about missing something with one format when you're doing the other format.
Yeah.
But video is so powerful and it's so digestible, and that it makes sense to do something. But it's also trickier and requires a lot of special care in terms of doing it right as well. And I would want to make sure that if I did something, that I was able and prepared to dedicate myself to it as responsibly and over the long term as I have done with this. So in some ways, it would feel almost like starting over. I guess it wouldn't be the same because I have all the contacts in that, but it would be taking on a very different aspect to the project.
Yeah. It's different content. I keep saying content, but yeah. In motion, it's different.
Exactly.
Completely. I think it's about time for us to wrap up. I do want to ask you technically, because you've been working on this for so long, how your equipment has changed.
Yeah, it's really changed in really minute ways, to be honest. I started it on SLR digital cameras, and I continue to photograph it on SLR digital cameras. It's just basically been upgrades and getting more and better gear. I guess when I started the project, this was my first really long-term project, and I was really learning as I went along. And I started with the equipment I had, which was a Canon 5D and a 16 to 35 mil lens and a 50 mil lens. And really that hasn't changed. Throughout the 13 years, I've moved on to the 5D2, the 5D3, the 5D4. And now I'm using a mirrorless camera as well. And some different lenses, but really all within the same focal length. The majority of my photos are taken with a 35 mil lens. And the portraits are usually with a 50 mil lens, and then sometimes I use a 24. Very rarely I use an 85. But yeah, really the gear has been pretty simple. I don't use lighting or anything for this project, so it's just a camera, and sometimes I'll just carry one lens, or I'll have a couple lenses on me.
And as a photojournalist, obviously you were always mobile. It's not like you ever had a studio set up or anything.
That's right. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that would be, if I was to do video, then that means bringing in a tripods and stuff like that too. And it just makes everything so much more bulky and more conspicuous too. So it's about navigating that. But SLR cameras are fairly big and they're fairly conspicuous anyway, but to bring in all those extra elements, it just adds more. And I like to work as inconspicuously as possible.
Great. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And nimbly. Got to get up on hay bales sometimes, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the big thing. You're moving around a lot.
Okay. Unless you have any final thoughts, I think that I'll wrap it up for everybody. I would like to thank everybody for joining us online. Deirdre for asking those questions. Anybody who's in Memmingen can see Die Hutterer at the MEWO Kunsthalle until this coming Sunday. It's been up for a couple months now. You can also visit their website, which is mewo-kunsthalle.de, in order to see the more detail about the exhibition and follow their other projects. They have some other great exhibitions up. And this talk will be recorded and posted on YouTube if you'd like to share it with any of your friends. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you so much, Axel. Go home and have dinner. Feel better, other Axel, Dr. Lapp. And we missed you, and hope that we can continue to collaborate in the future. Thanks, as always, to Julie and Anna behind the screen, our producers, and thank everyone for joining us. Have a great day. you.